Hey guys, what's going on? John here from What's Spinning. Hope everybody's doing well today. We're here to chat about the new Sharon Van Etten album, Remind Me Tomorrow. Sharon's a folk singer based out of Brooklyn. She got on the map years ago with her debut Because I Was in Love. And personally, while I like my folk a little bit more punchy, the sheer emotion that Sharon was putting forward on these recordings was absolutely immense. It's a very haunting album. It's very sort of old school singer-songwriter-ish, and the amount of emotion here is nuts. So much so that right off the bat, while this wasn't my favorite thing going at the time, I instantly felt like I knew Sharon. With releases like Epic and Tramp and Are We There, the production and Sharon's instrumental palette just seemed to get bigger with each passing moment. Sharon started bringing in more elements of more folk rock and even a little bit of country and indie rock thrown in. But interestingly enough, because of just how immensely personal and passionate her performances were, it really never took away anything, even if the rustic feel after a while sort of evaporated. Now, it's been a long time. It's been like 5 years since we've heard from Sharon. Honestly, this is one of my most anticipated albums of the year. I'm excited to talk about it, and from the sound of these singles, these are easily some of Sharon's most adventurous tracks to date. This album starts out with I Told You Everything. It's a very dramatic, slow start. Even though it's been years since we've heard from her, it's instantly this very personal song that still does have a sort of rustic vibe to it deep down. Like, we may have come a long way from these sort of stripped down ballads, but this is still painfully real at times. This is just such a blunt intro, such an in-your-face intro. And while Sharon's always had this very heartbroken style to her, this is an all-time high for emotion. But this one ends up being strangely heartwarming by the end of it. And honestly, has almost like a positive sense going towards the future. I Told You Everything just ends up becoming this really great intro track and telling this unbelievable tale of her opening up to someone for the first time. But as this album rolls on, it becomes very apparent very quickly that this is a new Sharon Van Etten, completely a much more adventurous one. Like, take for example Memorial Day. She said going into this album that she was very affected, very inspired by her work appearing on the last season of Twin Peaks when it was on the air. And on Memorial Day, it's obvious, my friends. This one has a very dreamy atmosphere that kind of just slithers in and out behind her. It's freaky and weird, but it's so good. Her vocals here are just so mysterious and genuinely chilling at times. And as this one goes on, it just evolves even more with these woozy synthesizers and these very graceful bells in the background. Personally, I'm just not used to hearing such an intricate instrumental from Sharon, and it's pretty wild. And while Sharon's performance here is more breathtaking than anything, it's also very commanding, and that's something that you're going to see throughout this entire album. Jupiter 4 to me kind of sounds like a great medium of this old sound for Sharon and this very new adventurous sound of Sharon. The very dreary tone to this album rages on in a big way with this almost menacing synth throughout this entire track. Alongside of that, Sharon's performance here is one of her most haunting here. This is a really chilling tune. Now, a lot of these tracks here are a little on the longer side for Sharon, and they aren't nearly as instantaneous as some of her early tunes. But it's still seriously so memorable between the storytelling lyrics and the throwback style to all this. It's still so powerful. Even some of the smaller details on Jupiter 4 are genius. Like, I love the repeated line of "a love so real," which she almost does it in a way where it kind of comes off like it sounds like a love surreal at the same time. It's just brilliant. We even get like more muscular and aggressive tracks later on tracks like Hands, which is something I seriously did not expect here. The synths here are just so aggressive and raw at times. It's crazy, really. Sharon comes off just as emotional, but here she sounds like she's about ready to stand up for herself or start a fight, and I actually really like that a lot from her. It's very hypnotic, it's very dreamy still, but once again, like I said earlier, Sharon comes off legitimately commanding at times, and I love that. Now, if you're an old school fan of Sharon, this is not going to be a sound that's going to be easy to swallow at first. It's going to take a few listens. It certainly did with me. But trust me, give it some time, because it really did grow on me a lot. Sadly, though, there are like one or two tracks here, not too many, but like one or two tracks here, where I feel like Sharon still needs to do a little bit more feeling out with this new electronic sound of hers. Take, for example, very early in the album on No One's Easy to Love. This one in a lot of ways comes off like an old school Sharon Van Etten track, but with a lot more electronics, and we have some synths woozing in and out behind her. Now, I really do actually love Sharon's performance here. It's very dreary, it's very emotional, it really does mirror a lot of what she was doing when she appeared on Twin Peaks. But call me crazy, instrumental-wise, this is my least favorite track of the bunch. The sentiment and the story behind this track actually are really important for Sharon, and I think, honestly, actually belongs on this album. But instrumentally, I think this track just is a train wreck. It just doesn't sound good. I basically have a lot of the same tracks from Malibu later on in the album. Once again, I feel like Sharon's very quaint performance is actually really sweet here and really likable. But after I've heard what she can do when she really focuses on these new instrumentals, I just feel like this one is a little lukewarm. This one gets so spacey at times that it actually ends up coming off distracting. I just wish this one was a little bit flashier. But if you're new to this sound of Sharon and you haven't dove into this album head first yet, try out Comeback Kid. This is easily one of the more newer sounding tracks from Sharon that's the easiest to get into. It's upbeat, it's rowdy, there are times where Sharon comes off almost kind of like an outlaw of sorts. And just listening to this production between the shimmering synths and just how glistening this track comes off, we've come a long way from the early days where Sharon was passing out her CDs at shows. And yeah, that's a lot to take in. But it's just so catchy, and it just comes off like this war cry of this new sound for Sharon Van Etten. This much more adventurous sound, and I love it. But for me, if I had to choose one song here that I would say is like really song of the album for me, I would have to say it's 17 by far. Once again, I kind of feel like this is a great balance for the classic sound of Sharon Van Etten and this much more adventurous sound. It still very much so has that classic throwback singer-songwriter vibe to it that I fell in love with years ago. But at the same time, this comes off much more modern and punchy, not even to a fault. It ends up just making this track even more memorable. And as far as Sharon goes on this track, some of her shouted vocals towards the end, I don't think I've ever heard more passion out of her ever, and it literally gives me chills sometimes. It even has that sort of slight outlaw rock feel that I always would get occasionally on Sharon's early records. This track has it all, and it's great. So overall, this is a pretty damn solid folk rock album. I mean, I'm not too wild about You Shadow. It's a pleasant sort of stripped down ballad. Where this track lacks in an adventurous sort of instrumental, Sharon brings in this sort of swagger here and ends up having some real attitude in some of the bars, and that I really love. But if you want to talk about a ballad on this album, we have to talk about Sharon's big finale here, Stay, which is absolutely gorgeous. Like, this is a throwback in every sense. There's no real adventurous instrumental here. There's nothing too out of the box for Sharon, but this is an absolutely heart-wrenching ballad. You know the drill by now. This is one of her least aggressive tracks on the album, but she still comes off so emotional and so pained. Her lyrics here are ultra charming and sweet. As a matter of fact, it's easily the sweetest track of the bunch by far. And honestly, it just ends up giving this album just the right amount of closure that I really needed. So while I honestly feel like I may have at certain points in my life enjoyed Sharon's earlier albums a little bit more, this is a great crossover for Sharon, crossing over into a much more polished, much more modern folk rock sound. It's easily her most adventurous album, and she ends up pulling it off without getting rid of any of the passion or emotion that's gotten her such a following for years. Honestly, my only real gripes are there are a couple of tracks on here that I wish she did a little bit more here. And yeah, this album's a little short. It's probably her shortest in a while. But still, highly recommend this modern folk album. I'm feeling a light 8 out of 10 on this one, but let me know what you think down below. If you like this review, be sure to subscribe and give us a like. Until next time, have a good day, guys.